Hello, everybody, and welcome to the G4A show. This is episode 111. If you're watching on video, you've already seen the reason that this week's episode was a little bit delayed was for scheduling reasons, because next to me I have Mr. Eat Sleep Game himself. On his return, Luke. How are you, Luke?
I'm good. I'm tired. I really
It's
need
been
a
a
nap.
very long time.
I mean, we talk all the time anyway, but it's been a long time on any kind of video thing. But
Yes, and you of course are here today to, if you've seen the episode title, you'll know we're talking about rediscovering love of video games,
Mhm.
because that was something that Luke in particular lost for a little while, and we'll talk about that later on. But before we do that, Luke, I think as always, because you haven't been here for a long time as well, what have you been playing?
Oh God. Um, a lot of things. A lot of things. It's spooky season, so on the channel at the minute, I'm doing a shitload of indie horror games, which is my sort of newfound love. I adore indie horror games. I just played Death Trips, which is literally a 10-minute indie horror game. It's got an incredible premise. Go find it. It's on itch.io. You can download it for free. It's chef's kiss. Wonderful. Or I just played Late Night Mop, I think it was called, which is made by Lixian, who is
What a
one of
strange name.
Markiplier's editors. It's partially inspired by Mortuary Assistant and Power Wash Sim, and it's fun. I romance a trash can in it. There are two trash cans on a bed having sex. They're not actually having sex, but I make it look like that in the video because I blur it and whatnot. Just shitloads of indie horror really recently. I played a bit of Trombone Champ, which is
to be
excellent. I
fair, to be
finished
fair,
that.
I would say, just sorry to cut you off,
No, no, no,
but
you crack
one
on.
thing I have noticed, which leads into our later topic, obviously, is that since leaving the podcast, I mean, you always played indie games anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but you've played a hell of a load of indie games, and you've actually probably played more games since leaving the podcast than you were for months and months
it's not
before.
even it's not even necessarily leaving the podcast, it's leaving that whole kind of process behind. Like
Yeah.
stop doing the reviews. I stopped looking at games that way. I stopped looking at a lot of things that way,
Yeah.
really,
And we
like
will
even
and
watching
we will
things
of
now.
course talk about that more in
Absolutely.
depth in a bit. But
um
what else have you been playing? Because you have been playing a lot.
well, bro, I've downloaded Grounded. I'm gonna do a Grounded video,
Nice.
so I want to check that out.
Well, if you do like that and you feel like playing any in co-op, let me know because
Yeah,
I
bro.
really
Yeah, yeah,
enjoy
yeah.
it.
I did a Metal Gear video. That was fun, nostalgic
Nice.
as hell.
Nice. I
Like,
think I missed that one, so I'll have to go and check that out.
man, it hasn't done extraordinarily well, but it was a nostalgia trip. I loved
Yeah,
it.
I
It
love
was
Metal
great.
Gear. Love
I've only
Metal
done
Gear.
like there's only one episode. I don't know if I'll go back and do more because it didn't do well, but I've enjoyed playing it.
Yeah.
And like I've dabbled with Elden Ring still every now and again in the
And of
background.
course, if people haven't seen, you've basically just been doing shorts all over the place. YouTube
Shorts are there, yeah.
shorts.
Yeah. I post those every day. I try and get in a video, like a full video episode out every 2 days, 3 days, something like that. Um, and it's been a lot of fun because I'm just playing a lot of like weird indie games that are really stupid, and then the occasional like Mortuary Assistant, which I adored. Um, Poppy Playtime, which I can't wait for. There's a new chapter coming out next year. Indie horror is absolutely my jam at the minute. It's so much fun. There's so many inventive and just silly things going on in that world. I love it so much. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And I
But
mean
otherwise,
that's the
I've kind of
case.
left it all.
That's the case. It's something that me and Jeff were talking about on the previous episode when we
Yeah.
spoke about spooky games. But that is actually the case across a variety of genres with indie, right? Because
Mm.
one of the things we were talking about is with those creators being limited in terms of budget and therefore potentially limited in terms of scope, they have to be more imaginative almost with their ways of holding players' attention. And
Yeah.
therefore, they do interesting things with their worlds or with their gameplay
Yeah.
mechanics.
And like a lot of these are just like people that have a fun idea or a silly idea. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
not game devs for a
Yeah,
lot of the time. It's people that
absolutely.
either learn how to
Yeah,
do it and make their silly little game, or it's a way to break in. Because like itch.io, bro, if you're not using itch.io, everybody go use itch.io because itch.io is fantastic. I adore that place. I love itch.io so much.
Before I bring up a few things that I've been playing, I do want to ask, because obviously you've played a lot of smaller games recently. Are there any big games that you're looking forward to or have played?
I've downloaded some. That's about as far as it got. Like I think recently Metal Hellsinger was the biggest one that I played.
Okay, yeah, that's a fairly big one. Obviously,
Which is
still
fun.
is still smaller in terms of what
Yeah,
you would classify.
it's still got its niche. It's
But
a niche
but
Doom.
in terms of being known, it's definitely more
Um,
known.
Elden Ring's the only thing I've really dabbled with all that much.
Mm,
I'm looking at Cyberpunk. I'm gonna get to it.
nice,
Gonna
nice. Well,
get to it at some
if you
point.
decide to do any videos on that, I'd be keen.
Oh
I would
yeah,
be
yeah. No,
keen.
the plan is
Um,
videos. Oh,
there is a
Mario. I've been
game.
playing Mario 3D Land. I've been playing that a lot. That's
Nice.
a lot of me and
There's a
my
game
brother
I
have been
wanted
playing
to
it and dying.
recommend to you as well, Luke, because
Oh
I
yeah,
saw
yeah,
you were
yeah.
playing Metal Hellsinger, and I know you're a Doom fan.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should take a look at Proteus, which is it is a game preview game currently, but is on Game Pass, so you should be able to
Yes.
access it.
I think I've looked at that.
Um, and it's basically Doom, but the original Doom if it was made today. It's really interesting.
You know
It's
what? I do know this. I've talked to someone that's given out codes, so I'm trying to
okay,
I'm trying to see if I can get a code for it.
nice, nice.
I think
Because
that's the one. Is it
I
the one?
saw it and I was like, oh, this is a loot game.
I mean, like honestly, pretty much anything is my kind of game at the minute.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh
Are you
oh no,
are
it's not. I'm thinking of a game called Post Void, which
oh,
actually
okay?
looks like if Doom was made.
Wow,
Like that
okay,
actually
interesting,
looks like just more colorful. It looks sick.
interesting.
I'm excited for it.
Um, are you looking forward to? I know like there's a few big games coming out. As quiet as this year's been, we would all say that this year's been a little bit more quiet than maybe usual.
Mm.
Is ending quite strongly. We've got some big upcoming games, Gotham Knights being one very soon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh God of War Ragnarok, Sonic, which I played at EGX and weirdly is very good from what I played.
I'm interested. I'm interested in
Um
Sonic.
and then obviously things like Callisto Protocol in December.
Mm.
And then on the slightly smaller scale, but one that we've both been watching for a long time is High on Life, also coming in December.
Oh yes, I
Uh,
cannot wait for High on
so
Life.
are there any of those kind of slightly bigger games that you're looking forward to?
Genuinely, mostly High on Life. I
Okay.
am so excited to check that out. That looks like a lot of fun. I'm watching like the new season of Rick and Morty at the minute. I love that stuff. I loved
Nice.
Office Simulator, Job Simulator. Job Simulator was awesome. Um, uh, I've just
It's a
really
very
embraced how
you
silly
game,
games
right?
are.
Very you.
Yeah. I've kind of like again we'll get into it in the actual conversation, but like
Mhm.
I've lost a lot of interest in like these
It
bigger
feels
games.
like you've become a kid again. Like I know that sounds weird,
No,
but
yeah, no, it is a little bit like I'm enjoying games a lot more because I'm not looking at the next AAA game. I'm like, this
yeah,
indie
for
game
sure.
looks sick. This
However,
game looks
though,
fun.
talking about AAA games,
Mm.
we're getting closer to God of War Ragnarok, and
Hmm.
that feels like it might be a special one, right? Like
I hope so. Like,
I know that the last trailer they showed finally kind of had you hyped for it. Um,
yeah, I think a lot of that was just some of the lines were sick. Like the Kratos death line is
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah,
excellent.
absolutely. But I just think we're all in. We're like the weird thing about God of War. If we can take a little quick tangent, as we always do when we're doing this show, um,
Absolutely.
the weird thing about God of War is I think that everybody who played the 2018 God of War is in for this game regardless of what they see, and
Yeah.
therefore that's almost what makes it feel not as hype. Does that make sense? Like
100%. Yeah.
like like I'm in to play it, but I know I'm gonna play it anyway, so I'm
Yeah.
not getting hyped up about it. Like
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm the same. Like I haven't really been all that excited for it for ages.
yeah.
It's just been like, yeah, that's coming at some point. I'll check
Mhm.
it out. That's cool. I
Yeah.
think there's more. If it was like another Last of Us, I think I would probably be more excited because I like love that series and
Yeah.
whatnot. But then
Mhm.
again, I don't even know if I am. Genuinely, the thing I'm most excited for is the next chapter of Poppy Playtime.
That's crazy.
I'm so
That's
stoked for that
crazy.
game. I can't wait. This
I
hoodie
love
behind
it.
me is a Poppy Playtime hoodie.
Nice,
I got
nice.
pins up there. Like I've gone
The
full in on that sort of stuff.
it's the indie boy living up to his name. Our
Bro, like
G4A indie boy.
I'm fully in. I'm fully in on
Nice,
it. I love it. It's
nice.
great.
So as for me, I mean I've been playing bits and pieces. So I actually started playing again before Plague Tale Requiem. I started playing Plague Tale Innocence. Um
I need to do that.
just because, Requiem's coming out a week today.
Is
So
it really?
yeah, a week today.
I
The
need to
game's
do that.
10 hours long, the first game, I
Mm.
mean. So, you can do it. If you can fit
Hmm.
10 hours in the next week, you will be able to do it. It's
I mean, I
not
can swing
overly.
it as it being a kind of horror game of sorts, kind of
I
little
think
bit,
you could. I think
maybe,
you could. Um
maybe. But then that's kind of another thing I found. I'm not in a rush to play these games.
yeah,
I'll
that's
get to
true.
it.
That's true.
I'll
I
get there.
do think Plague Tale's definitely one that's worth playing. Um
Mm.
and
I own.
with the second one coming so soon, and it does
Yeah.
look like, we'll see. I'll be reviewing it for outerhaven.net um after it comes out, just
Hmm.
because sometimes codes are hard to get a hold of, we'll say, and
Yeah.
sometimes we just got to find our own way of covering things. But I will be reviewing it, and it looks like it's a step up from the first game. It looks like they've made improvements, so that's going to be exciting to see. But if you haven't played the first game, it is really worth playing. Like, it really is, and it's a
I keep
10-hour
hearing. Yeah.
game. Like,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
everyone wanted these shorter story driven games to come back, and here's one. And then lots of people either don't even know it exists or just sort
Hmm.
of ignored it because it's not this massive AAA shiny thing.
It's not pushed as one of those huge games. Yeah.
And it's like, it's great though. It's really
Hmm.
great.
Yeah,
So
man. Yeah.
yeah,
It's like
go and
me
check
and
that
what
out, because
remains.
like I said, if you play that this week, you can go straight in, and as far as I'm aware, the story is a direct continuation. So in a way, that might be a nice way to experience the sequel. So yeah, I've
Hmm.
been playing a bit of that. Like I said, I will be playing the sequel next week. And then what else? FIFA 23, because I did a review for that. So I've been kind of dipping in and out of that. You know how I
Have
am
you
with
played as
FIFA.
that fake team from
Yeah, yeah. Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso?
Love that
Ted Lasso.
program, so I had to
Never
play.
seen it.
Oh, it's brilliant, brilliant, brilliant comedy
Isn't
program.
one of the not Ryan Reynolds, but the other dude that owns
Mhm.
Wrexham? He's in it, isn't he?
He does show up in it because they're friends. So him and the guy who plays Ted Lasso are very, very friendly.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I
and that's
see.
why
I was like, you get one of them. You don't put Ryan Reynolds in your football
yeah,
game.
the
It's
weird
Ryan Reynolds.
and the weird thing is they've actually been teasing some sort of further crossover between Wrexham Football Club itself and Ted Lasso, the show. So I don't
Yeah,
know
because
if
there was
Wrexham
that.
might be in the show.
Isn't there like a link between FIFA and the Wrexham documentary or something as well? Or
I
is that?
think so. Yeah, I think
Yeah, yeah.
so. Um, so
That's how
yeah, so
little
I've
I've
been
seen
playing a bit
FIFA.
of that. I've dabbled in Grounded, and I really like what I've played so far. I just
Nice.
haven't had the time to play more of it, but I actually think, based on what I've played, which is only a couple of hours, it might be one of the best survival games I've ever played.
Have did you turn the spiders off?
No, no, I did not.
Good
But you
boy.
can.
Yeah, I know you can. Just don't. Embrace the spookums, people.
um,
Get scared. It's fun.
but yeah, no, it's genuinely scary. Like, I had a bee flying over me for like 5 minutes when I was playing, and it's like, no, run away. It's like, no,
I'm gonna
no,
do a video. I'm gonna get to it
because
at some
these
point.
things are massive. But yeah, I think you'll like it as well, Luke. Because the thing about it is, it's got those survival aspects that you'd
Hmm.
expect, but they're a little bit easier to come to terms with, because when you need to craft certain things, markers will actually come up showing you where those things are or where you can
Sure.
find them. But then also, very much a Luke thing and a me thing as well, the game has an actual story, which
Right.
for a survival game is a big change. Um, but there is an actual story, and of course, yes, with it being a survival game, pacing can sometimes be an issue because you have to do certain things before being able to kind of get to the next chunk of story. But there's definite story in this game. And there's other things like audio logs you can find to build out the world and all that kind of stuff. Like you're basically figuring out why you're small and what has happened to you, and then how to make yourself big again. Yeah, I
Sure, there's
actually
a
think
pill for
it's
that.
I think it's a I think it's a
Get
great
Blue Chew
great
or something.
game.
Get sponsor.
And yeah, I'm keen to play more of it. You never know. Maybe you'll get a weird video of me and Luke playing in co-op. Who
Stranger
knows?
things have happened.
Who
Stranger
knows?
things.
So yeah. Other than that, though, not a lot from me. I've been very busy with my day job, which is making video games. Um, yeah, and that kind of plays into our topic on my side of this finding my love of games again thing, which we will get to. But Luke, I want to talk to you because obviously you left the podcast about 2 months ago now, or so.
Something,
Um,
yeah.
um, and part of the reason for that was because you just you didn't really have the passion for it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that we've always enjoyed talking and we've continued to
Yeah.
talk about video games.
Yeah.
But doing it in this way and almost being forced to think about things on maybe a deeper level than you actually want to is sometimes grinding. So why don't you talk about, before we talk about the rediscovering part,
Mm-hmm.
why did you lose your love of games in the first place?
So there was for people who have been following me long enough, they know I started out doing like game reviews and whatnot. So it's always been quite analytical the way that we were looking at games between the podcast team reviews, and then the more we were doing the podcast, the more we were seeing a lot of negative stuff come out. And there was so much negativity around making games and these companies and what have you.
Absolutely.
Even just down to this game's pretty much the same as this game, it's just being reskinned or what have you.
Do you think there's also another aspect where because something I've noticed about doing podcast and kind of when you talk about games so much as well, is you start to focus on the negatives even when you like something, and yet you still focus on the negative points because those are the ones that come to your mind first.
It's just a human condition. Like negatives linger way longer than anything else will. Like that's why like in a lot of like customer service roles or even in games, there's the expression is it's how you leave them, because you can have a 10 out of 10 game, but if you have a really shit ending, like Mass Effect. Mass Effect had, whatever happened. I didn't play Mass Effect 3. I still haven't. I'll get to it one day, I swear. But like they fucked up the ending. And then everyone was like, Mass Effect sucks. And Mass Effect is a bit now. Like the game up to the end was supposed to be incredible still. It was, and still
that's one of the things. So that thing, just again, sorry for a little tangent, people.
No.
But one, that can go both ways, because we've discussed it before as well, where you can actually not be liking a game that much, and then by the time it ends, it's kind of ties everything together in such a good way that you do enjoy it, because you realize, this is what they were doing.
Like Godzilla. That Godzilla movie, most of it sucked, and then Godzilla started fighting the other thing, and that was sick.
The
rest of the movie was like, cool. Where did Heisenberg go? Why are we stuck here with I was going to call him Flash when it was Quicksilver. Why are we stuck here with Quicksilver? He's boring as tits. Like,
but then there's that other bit, like you said, where if an ending doesn't pan out or whatever, it can kind of ruin the experience. And that's why sometimes as well, we know there are massive long games these days, right? And I think that in a way, Assassin's Creed might be a good example of this, where I know some people who play Assassin's Creed And then once they get to about 30 hours, they
Mhm.
don't want to play anymore. And if they do, it actually kind of ruins their experience of the game
Yeah, sure.
because they go, oh no, I'm not actually enjoying this anymore. So they then don't remember the things they did enjoy
Yeah, yeah. I
for
had
that
that with
first
Odyssey.
30 hours.
I had that with Odyssey, where it's like these first couple hours are sick, and then the map just goes whoom, and I'm like, oh no, not doing it.
Yeah.
I can't do this again.
And so I do think there's an element as well of, we talk about like finishing games and all this kind of stuff and how not many people finish games anymore.
Hmm.
But the thing is, ultimately, the more I think about it, is like, of course, as a developer, I'd love you to finish the game, especially in a story driven sense. Like, see the story out and see what you
Mhm.
really think. But then there is that element of don't push yourself to a point where you make yourself not enjoy the game just because you've played too much of it.
100%.
Because that can happen. Like it really can, I there are I talked about FIFA earlier on, and
Mhm.
years ago there were times where I'd play FIFA for hundreds of hours in a
Mhm.
year.
Mhm.
But I've gone past that now because I play my 30 or 40 hours of FIFA a year, and that's enough for me. I
Yeah, yeah,
don't
yeah.
need to play
Yeah.
more than that because I get my enjoyment out of it. And yeah, that's not a game you can finish, but my point is I get my enjoyment out of it. And then when
You get
I'm
your fill.
done, that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. You get your fill. Like I've had it so many times when I've tried to, like The Witcher was one where I kept trying to go back and force it, but like I just eventually fall off of it, and it didn't necessarily dampen any like
And that
memories or any
also
impression I had of it.
doesn't mean that it's never worth forcing a game. Just be
Mhm.
careful about which games you're forcing, is what
It's
I
kind of
would
like
say.
anything. Like you know your limit. Like you know when you stopped having fun. It's like sick. If it's not fun
Yeah.
anymore, just put it down. And like you've
And
had fun
I
up to
I
that point. It's cool.
and there's always, I know that some people say that the problem for them is the reason that they force a game is because in the back of their mind there's always that thing of, but if I play an extra hour I might actually love it because something might change. And yes, that's true, but
Mm.
you can only play an extra hour one or two times before you're really kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
pushing yourself to the point of,
yeah.
why make yourself not like a game that you actually enjoyed up to that point? Like,
Mm.
why do that? One, the game doesn't really deserve that because it still made you enjoy it to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And two, you're just wasting your own time. Like,
Mm.
if you know you've enjoyed what you've played and you're not enjoying what's there, like,
On the reverse side,
it's
that
okay
is
to
the
let it
plight.
go.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
That is
absolutely.
the plight of the completionist. Because I feel that every game I play, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna collect all of it, and
Absolutely.
then like I just
Well,
don't.
well, it's like, it goes back to one of the agreements we made a long time ago, which was for you to finish Death Stranding. And
I even made a review about it.
my hope with that was that you finishing the game would change your opinion. And I think it somewhat did, as
It
we've
kind
spoken
of,
about before.
yeah, it kind of just sort of reinforced and
It
uh
reinforced the things you didn't like, but it made you like the things you did like more, I would
no,
say.
not necessarily. It just kind of reinforced my thoughts on the game. It was exactly, I was right with how I felt about the game. It was
Mhm.
like the story
For
beats and the
you,
characters
right?
are
Yeah,
cool,
yeah. Hmm.
but like they're too far apart, and there's nothing I
Absolutely.
can
But there is
compare.
probably part of you, as much as we joke about it back and forth all the time,
Mm.
there is probably part of you where you are happy that you saw that game all the way through in some ways.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because
Because,
I like the story. I don't think it's a bad story by any stretch.
yeah,
I just think if it was a 20-hour game instead of a fucking
absolutely.
80-hour game or however
Absolutely.
much time it was I put
So,
in it,
so that
it'd be
kind
sick.
of tells you about getting
Yeah.
your fill of the game
And it's
and
kind of
enjoy.
on a similar note, it is also one of those where it did get to a point and it did kind of retract how much I liked it because they changed an aspect where they introduced actual guns. And I was like, no, I like this other
You
approach
liked
to it
that
where you
it
got to
didn't,
tie
right?
people
Yeah,
up
yeah.
and it's not like
And
direct
that's
combat
something,
necessarily.
I saw, and there's a, I don't know anything about this, so I'm not
Oh God,
confirming
not the
anything,
second one. Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. With Ellie
there
Fanning.
is, of course, the kind of big rumored Death Stranding 2. Kojima seems to be teasing it right now, but we never know with Kojima because it could be
Have
something
you
completely different.
have you seen things that the poses she does in those two photos are poses that BB does?
Oh wow, okay, I didn't know that.
So the
Okay.
one where she's like that up against the camera,
Oh my god.
that's
Oh
BB
my
pressed up
god.
against the thing, and then I can't remember what the other one is, but
Okay,
there's a
so
picture of him running.
here's
But
two things for me, and sorry about this tangent, people, because this is
Tangent
just
City, bro.
me and Luke. This is what it
This is what we
is.
do.
Um,
That's why we talk for so long, because we go down a million roads.
but so there's two ways of thinking on it. One, I think it was extremely silly of Google if it's true that Google actually cancelled the sequel to Death Stranding, which they had weirdly. They've obviously died now as a
Yeah, I think it depends
platform.
on the circumstances of the cancel. I would imagine they cancelled it because, yeah, this is a dead platform. There's no point.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
might as well go
for sure.
make it anywhere else.
For sure. And then the other thing is like, as much as I loved Death Stranding, and I actually think that it is a game that should be held in high regard. And I know this is going to sound strange, but just stick with me for a second. In a way, I think it should be held in high regard, even if you don't like it, because it's doing something different in the AAA space, which is what everybody's
Um,
cried out for years.
kind of.
And
I appreciate that it does something different. It doesn't
yeah,
mean
that's what I
make it.
mean.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
like
yeah,
me saying, "Oh, hold it in high regard," as "Oh, this
yeah,
is amazing," but
yeah, 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 yeah.
it's more like at least let it have its thing, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
not for you.
It
Let
tried
it,
something. Yeah, yeah. I agree.
yeah. Um, and but then that's where I come back to, because I loved the first game so much, and because I do think it stands on its own as a game that will always be remembered, either fondly or as something people
Mm-hmm.
didn't really click with. It did something different, and it created a place in history because of that. It doesn't need a second game,
Mm.
but I would also play the shit out of a second game. So it's weird. It's really weird
Yeah, it kind of
because
depends
the
where
other
it goes.
because the thing with the second game is, one, my concern would be it could make it very, very different. But then two, my hope is also that what it would do is fix some of the issues that people had that would have liked it. For example, we joke about it all the time, but if Death Stranding was exactly the same game, but it was 20 hours long, you probably would have liked it.
Yeah, just cut all the
like
shit. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
like
Cut all
it's
the. Oh yeah, great. Thanks for traveling for 2 hours to come meet me. Now fuck off over the other side of the map and go meet that other person.
and it's one of those things where it's like it's an unnecessary sequel, but it's also a sequel that, if it is being made, could create something even better, because
Mm-hmm.
it could kind of fine tune what that is, where it can keep the different aspects of it and the different thing that it's doing, but like you said, cut the fat, right, and cut the stuff that doesn't need to
Well,
be there.
I think this is something that all big game devs need to do.
Mm.
Like, in a way, I wish there wasn't so much money in those higher end game devs, because I think if they were restrained somewhat and they had to think more about how they were doing things and not just be like, yeah, sick,
Yeah.
we'll just do
And
all of
also,
the
that's
things,
just to be
it'll
clear,
work better.
that's not to say that we're saying that they don't think about what they're doing, because
No,
they
no, no, no,
very
no.
clearly do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
It's
what
just they'd
Luke
have to
means
think
is, in a
more
creative
ingenuity.
sense, if you've got to be more creative, because
Yeah,
if you can't just add more of the same content
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
you don't have the budget,
yeah,
how do you make the game interesting,
yeah,
and how do you
100%.
keep it
And that's
interesting?
like that's why I love so many of these indie games, because they're working on such a small budget and like a
Mm-hmm.
small amount of time or what have you,
Absolutely.
but they find twists to put on things
Mm.
because to like work with that, and I'd love it. There are so many games would benefit, like Ghost of
Yeah.
Tsushima. We've talked a million times about, like, if there were a couple of things they followed more and went down slightly different mechanics with, I think that could have been a way better game. I think that could have been held in a higher regard than like
Mm-hmm.
Horizon is,
Yeah, yeah,
and same
and
with Horizon for that
the
matter.
weird thing is, I think there are many, many great games, and I do even think weirdly this is where we differ a little bit, and maybe not massively, but I think there is a space for those games that are kind of overblown masses of content, right? Without a
Yeah,
better way of putting it, there is still a space for those kind of
yeah.
games because there is an audience that loves them and they
I think
love
there's
them
just
for
too
that.
many.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
too
yeah.
many, and they kind of every time I've said it before on the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
every time someone's like, the map is bigger, I'm like, that's not a selling point. That doesn't make me more
It
interested.
was
If
years ago,
anything, that
right? It
yeah,
was
yeah,
years
yeah,
ago, but
yeah, it was. But now it's like everyone's map's bigger. That does nothing. Tell me it's
yeah,
denser. Tell me like there's more built into it. I don't care how big your map is.
absolutely,
Look at Yakuza.
absolutely.
Like, does
um,
nothing for me.
and yeah, so kind of going back to why you fell out of love with video games, because that is part of it as well, right? Is there were a lot of games that were doing very, very similar things.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, there was a lot of kind of negativity in the industry, but then also on the coverage of the industry point, we kind of we got to the point with the podcast where we were focusing on negatives as well, like I think every single podcast in existence does,
Yeah, because that's all that was.
because
Like
that's
there
all
wasn't
there
really
was.
anything
and and
else. Yeah.
and I think the weird thing is when you focus so much on negatives, and I've had this discussion with you before, I think that it means that even when there are positives, they're hard to see
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
all you think about is the negative,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't actually give the positive or potential positives even the space for you to think about.
Yeah, and it's not like, talking about the negatives is a bad thing in any way. Like,
No,
it is an
because they
important
should
thing
be
to
talked
do.
about, right? Yeah, yeah.
100%. It was just a lot of and we're still seeing it in a lot of journalism, be it any of our interests, be it gaming, wrestling, or just regular old news. Like,
Yes.
a lot of the reporting is either just straight up made up and it's not true and it's not real and it never was. And then,
Or it frames something as negative because it's trying to get a click, right? And
yeah, yeah,
negative
yeah.
things get clicks.
But then that'll be picked up by a bigger outlet, and then that outlet will not sort of course correct. It'd be like, no, our source was wrong, this thing's wrong, whatever. Like, and then it would just hurt so many things. I
Yeah, yeah.
forget there was a game that was really negatively affected by something like that, and I forget it off the top of my head. Obviously, proving my point. But yeah, no, there was just such a lot of negativity around that time, and like, going through like the way I was trying to make content.
Because at one point we touched on it earlier,
Yeah,
but you were doing full on reviews, and you were
yeah,
doing
man, yeah.
very, very good reviews as well.
Bro, they were getting long. They were getting longer and longer, and I loved it. Like, I really enjoyed doing that.
And
That sort of stuff and the whole
I did
process behind it.
notice this kind of falling out of love with gaming coincided with the falling out of love with reviewing aspect as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
why did that happen?
it kind of just got to a stage where I wasn't able to play as much as I wanted because I'd play Horizon Zero Dawn. No, what's the second
Forbidden
one called?
West.
Forbidden West. Thank you. Forbidden West was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back on this. It's like I played that. I put as much time as I could in and felt like I could before trying to write the review on that, and it was like about 80 hours or so.
We reviewed it on the podcast as well, so it was one where
We did.
we all kind of rushed it more than we maybe would have.
I absolutely did not. I still took my time with that.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, yeah.
And like I got like halfway through writing whatever my review was going to be. It's still there. I haven't added to it. It's just in the ether. And like I had got back into watching a lot of Game Grumps and a lot of Markiplier and a lot of Ashley Roboto is a hell of a lot of fun. And just people like that who are just having fun with other games and being silly about them or whatnot. And that that's the same reason I love comic books and stuff like that. It's all the silliness and all the word. And I think it just got a bit too serious. They were all kind of pushed. Like, this is that was a game about freaking robot dinosaurs in the future, and you're hunting them like you're some Neanderthal sort of level. Shouldn't be.
And also, there's a level of critical thinking where, and I don't want to kind of belittle anyone, but there's a level of critical thinking where you get to the point where you're taking things too seriously and you then take them out of context and it actually creates problems.
I haven't watched review for anything in ages.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that reason is now because I fundamentally hate the idea of a review. I think they are kind of antithetical to what, and I think a lot of bigger game devs have kind of lost this as well, but I think it is antithetical to the art behind it. It's like, this isn't meant to be a perfect piece of art. This is just what it is. Like, it's saying what it is in the way it's saying it because of X reason, Y reason, whatever. And you kind of lose sight of what a game is when you're trying to be critical about it all the time, when you're just playing games.
And also, I think what doesn't help with that, and we've spoken about it before, but because there's no clear defined thing of what a review actually is, like in each person's mind, a review is a different thing.
Yeah.
For some people, it's a completely opinion piece only based on their experience with the game. For other people, it's about informing people about what the game does while also putting across, this is how I experienced this thing, and this is what I think of it. And I think that because there's no one blanket true thing of what a review is and what it's really meant to accomplish, I think that is what also creates problems with reviewing, because it's kind of like, who am I doing it for, right? And I've noticed that going into writing reviews, which is an odd thing because I went into it as you came out of it.
Literally.
But it's one of those things where, and I'll talk about it more when I go on to my side of why I actually lost my love of gaming for a while. But it's one of those things where what I have realized is, in doing reviews, it's not about who I'm writing it for. It's about the people who want to read it, right? So I write what I think and I inform about the game. Like, my thing is, I will talk about everything in the game, and as I feel appropriate, I will be like, I enjoyed this, or this was my favorite option out of these things. But it's not really about, until the summary point of the review, until the very end of the review, where I'm summarizing what I actually think of the game. The rest of it is information. The rest of it is informing the reader or viewer what this game does, what things that it does that I like along the way, what things that I'd maybe improve. But the other thing that people don't realize is, and you wouldn't know this without being a reviewer and potentially being a developer as well, is negative reviews are just as important as positive ones. And I think that sometimes positive, like, people, and I'm not criticizing anyone, right? But just in general, as gamers, whether you're doing a serious written review or whether you're just talking about a game, I think it goes one of two ways. I think people either focus too hard on the negatives, like we discussed earlier, and it all becomes negative because it's like, oh, I didn't like this, this, and this, and this. But then you're like, but it was a good game. But then you don't tell them what you did like. So it's... And that goes back to the thing of, it's because nobody knows what a review is. Some people think that a review is, trying to sell the product. And in some way it kind of is. Like, that's part of its job in the sense, but you're not trying to sell the product in the sense of, oh, look at this, buy it. It's more like, I'm trying to find the audience or help the audience who want this thing find it. Right? Because my FIFA 23 review, for example, there'll be some people who read that and are like, yeah, I'm not going to buy it. Or there'll be some people who read it and they're like, okay, I wasn't going to buy it, but I will now. And so it's not about selling the game. It's more about helping the audience for the game find the game. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and like, that's not to say, like, I think reviews, like, all reviewers are inherently bad at what they do. Like, there are loads that are great. In particular,
I think there are very few bad reviewers.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah,
problem
yeah.
is,
The
I think
reviews
the
and
problem
stuff.
is that some people only align with certain reviewers' ways of thinking about what a review is.
Well, and too many people are just like, oh, number. That means the game is
Mhm.
good or bad. That's it. When you're not actually taking in any context.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I think like a couple of people absolutely nail it because they take the review process and put their own spin on it, and it's clearly defined, like the
Yeah.
completionist. I love the completionist. I think Gerard is an incredible human being. I think he does like some incredibly entertaining reviews, and like within his spectrum, it is
Mhm.
easily understandable what it is he's trying to achieve. But on the other side of that, I've bought more games after watching people play it and fuck about and have a fun time. I
When you can see it is different, right? When you
Yeah.
can like, and obviously, yes, you when it's a gameplay kind of when there's gameplay in a review, it always helps. So something like ACG, for example, he does a good job of kind of showing gameplay
Mm.
of what he's actually talking about as well, which is
Mm-hmm.
really helpful. But at the same time, that's not the same as watching him play the game. And
Yeah.
that's not me criticizing him. I actually think he's one of the best reviewers out there. I've said that to you time and time again.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think, it goes back to I just think that because there's no blanket understanding, especially within
Yeah.
games, about
There's
what
no
a
template.
review
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, in a weird way, with movies and other types of products, there actually is sort of an understanding
I
of what a review is.
I think beyond product reviews, like this product works, it doesn't, is good for this, is good for that. I
Yeah,
think most reviews do not have a template. I think they're all kind of for
that's true.
instance.
And I think
Um,
that's kind of the problem, right? Is the weird thing about a game is part of a part of a game review is a product review. Part of it,
mhm.
but not the whole thing is. And that's where they become a little bit more
Yeah,
interesting
yeah,
to
yeah.
think about.
Because
Um,
like you could be talking to someone like I've got friends like who don't like uh Blade. I always want to call it fucking Cyberpunk. It's not Cyberpunk. The newer Blade Runner movie. I adore
okay.
that movie. It's like my favorite movie. But they don't like it for XYZ reason. If they were to write a review about it, they'd say it was shit. If I
Mm-hmm.
was to write
Yeah,
a review about it, I'd say I loved it. It's my favorite movie now.
yeah.
And like I think there are too many reviewers that just go, I'm reviewing things and not enough that go, I'm reviewing things within this parameter. This is my goal
Mm-hmm.
for reviewing it. I'm going to
Yeah,
review it based on how good and fun it is to complete
yeah.
or how it holds up. Like
Is
Ridiculous
is
is just,
what your review is focused on, right? So,
yeah.
and for me, I change that with each review that I do. So, for example, I reviewed earlier in the year Trek to Yomi, and the reason I
Oh, yeah.
reviewed it
Yeah.
so highly was because I was like, okay, I'm going to take this game as it is, which is clearly inspired by Kurosawa,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like it's
Yeah.
trying to do a Kurosawa thing in game form. And I was like, I'm going to review it as how well does it do that?
Mm.
And it does that extremely well. And that's why it got the rating it got from me, because that's the lens I was taking. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's still I explain what I like about the game and what I don't within that review, but my angle for the review was how well is it doing the thing that it's trying to do.
Yeah. And I think that's the trouble with when you haven't got an outlying. Again, I keep going back to the completionist, but
Mm,
he goes into games to rate how good or fun or terrible they are to complete. When you've got to change that game to game,
yeah.
that's where it gets really tricky, and that's what the majority of people have to do. They have to change it from game to game because you can't ever compare this
Because
game
you're
to that
going
game
across
because they'll think
genres,
differently.
right? So it's like when
Well,
I
it's that, and people take it the wrong way. If you
yeah.
compare X game to X game, they'll, you're bound to get a guy that goes, no, no, that's not like
Mhm.
that game. It's like, no, that's not what I meant. I mean,
It's
it's
just
got a little
like
bit of this, a
mhm.
little bit of that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And
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 I
and
just,
that's
it's
something that
impossible.
I noticed when I reviewed the latest F1 game,
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah.
was actually the highest rating I'd given so far on the Outer Haven scale. I gave it 5 stars out of 5. But my reason for that was ultimately F1 as a game is trying to emulate the sport.
Mm,
And in terms of in video game form, it is the best emulation of the sport that has ever existed.
sure,
So how can it not be? Do you see what I mean? It
sure,
was
sure, sure,
like,
sure, sure.
unless it's actually broken and unplayable, there's no way I can rate it as less than this because it is the best one at what it's trying to do.
Just
It was a
just
weird.
speaking, you mentioned the scale then, and I in the back of my head forever, for the longest time since I've been doing these let's plays, I've
Mm,
had the idea of like a tiny skit in the back of my head that I was going to do for every playthrough that I do, and it was just rating a game something ridiculous and just giving it an utterly arbitrary whatever. Like this
yeah,
is
for no
700
reason.
tomatoes.
Yeah.
It's 700 tomatoes out of 83 or some random shit like that, just to show how stupid these numbers are. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
mean anything.
I
I
get why
like
scales are used, and
yeah.
I do, and I think there is a way they can be used properly. I think the problem is, and this is me again, not criticizing the public, but just thinking about me as a gamer and the way I look at reviews and the way I used to look at reviews. I think there's too much comparing with reviews. So, for example,
Yep.
some people would say something like Ori and the Will of the Wisps can't be a 10 out of 10 because it's not as good as X, Y, and Z game. But the thing is, for its genre, it is. And I think there's too much scales are used to compare, which is fine when you're only comparing within the same genre, I
Yeah.
think. But when
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
start comparing across genres, that's just not even a fair thing to do.
How can Forza Horizon be game of the year
I know, right?
every year? Every year is the same thing.
So
It's the same thing every year.
so that's obviously a problem, and that is a big reason it sounds like that you kind of fell out of love with games as well.
It was, and it wasn't necessarily that I'd completely fallen out of love. I still liked playing them. I just liked. I was finding more and more that I didn't like playing them and thinking the way I was thinking about them.
Yeah.
And then
Which is weird because for a long time you did, right? For a long time you
yeah,
enjoyed thinking on that level about
yeah.
games.
But I think half of that was so many of the games I was like hoping to review and whatnot
Mm.
were, they were coming out and it was like, oh, cool, it's another open world game. I've played this. I've done this. It's the same
So you
as
got
this
to
other
the
game.
point where it felt like the same thing, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
That
yeah,
makes
yeah.
sense.
And like,
I wanted to ask you something because I think I've heard this from a few people, and I think it's important, especially in the gaming space.
mm.
How did social media, or what you read on social media or what you've interacted with on social media, impact your kind of attitude towards games?
Um, it didn't really, I don't think. I think there was more, I was just seeing more that I
Okay.
wanted to check out. Um, I don't really think other
because
than
because one of the things that we spoke about was about how
mm,
something you notice when you sort of disconnect yourself from the conversation for a little while, and we'll call
mm,
it the conversation, but what we mean by that is like covering games,
yeah,
but also interacting with the Twitter space, which is the main space for games. I think these kind of days,
sure, yeah,
most gaming conversation happens on Twitter, and I think that when you tune out of that circle and you kind of go back to just being the gamer,
just enjoying the game. Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
know, I think that what you realize is, oh, actually, there's a lot of games that maybe don't live up to the standards of the circle that I still love, but I
Mm-hmm.
ignored them before because I was taught to by the conversation.
The way that I began describing it to people, because I've had a couple of people ask me why I stopped doing reviews after they've like discovered one of my reviews or whatever, is is I stopped giving a shit about the forest and I just care about these individual trees. I like
That's
flip
interesting.
the adage on its head. Like you're not seeing the forest for the trees. I'm like, I don't give a shit about the forest. I care about these individual trees. The forest
Yeah.
is fucking boring and
And
monotonous.
and and also
People,
you'd rather take time to look at each individual tree, right? Like
yeah,
even within the forest, why are you going to let one massive tree that everyone's talking about, why are you going to let that guide your journey when actually by aiming only for that thing and going to discover that thing, you might miss seven other trees that you
well,
prefer?
that's kind of the my like a massive issue. Like I've not liked like how these conglomerates are coming in and they're buying up everything. I haven't liked that for a good while.
Yeah.
It was exciting at first with Microsoft because it was like, oh, these
Yeah.
smaller devs are going to get more of a
And we
chance and
and
whatnot.
we of course have gone back and forth on that, and I think we still could, because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
I think that, as we've always said, the weird thing is I get it from the conglomerate aspect that you're going into here. I
Mm.
get that side of it. But there's always that thing of me though of like, just because that's the way something appears doesn't make it automatically bad. Just because
And
it
you know,
seems
there's good and
bad.
bad on both sides of it as well. Like
Absolutely.
nothing
Absolutely.
is black and white.
Well,
Um,
it's like, and not to comment on this too much, just because, but it's like the Activision situation. I was having a
mhm.
conversation with someone the other day, and they were talking about how, and this is just a gamer friend of mine, who was talking about how their opinion on the Activision deal has actually massively changed, because what they did was they took their own perspective away from it, and they realized that while they might not like it, it's actually good for the people that work there, which in theory should be good for the games.
Mhm.
And if it's not, the company will hear about it when they need to hear about it.
Yeah, that's never really been my approach on it. It is just more, you know, one controlling many things.
Yeah,
I'm
for
not a
sure,
fan of that
for
because
sure.
you know you get the wrong
Well,
person in
that has
charge. They
very
can
obvious problems, right?
exactly. That's the biggest worry.
When one entity controls too much,
Mm.
they end up controlling everything by having
Mhm.
so much control.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I absolutely get that aspect of it for sure. I
Mm.
don't think we've ever
Um,
really disagreed on that.
no. Like I said before, there are positives and negatives on both sides of it.
Mm.
But
So yeah,
you
you
know,
were
it's
saying
just
like, it was, you were talking about how kind of all this like purchase, like the industry is changing, right? Like that's the way of
Mhm.
putting it. Like the gaming industry is changing, and some of those things are going to be positive, some are not, which is
Mhm.
always the case with every time the gaming industry changes. Let's
Yeah.
remember that. Like every time it changes, there are good and bad in both ways.
Mhm.
Um, and this is happening again, but this feels like a massive change for the gaming industry. And I've seen that quite a few people, because of the way that it's changing, or at least because of the rapidness at which it's changing,
Yeah.
I think it's put some people off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like we've talked about in the group chats and stuff like that before. Like, do we really need a remake of Horizon Zero Dawn?
I know, right? That was one of the things. Yeah, that was one
Like,
of the things
come
that came
on,
up.
make a different game,
Mm-hmm.
make a
Well,
smaller
we've, Sean,
whatever.
who's
Like,
obviously not here, but has been on the show many, many times in the past. Um, Sean often says, like, there's an over reliance on existing IPs, and sometimes
yeah,
you're using the IP to just use the name when you could just make a brand new thing.
Assassin's
And
Creed.
I think there's not, and I think there is not enough of that. We all know that.
Yeah.
We all know that is true. And
Well, I
you
mean,
know,
even like I saw I didn't even know it was a thing. It's disconnected from like AAA stuff. Is this the new Assassin's Creed Mirage? Is that what it's
yeah,
called?
which is yeah, that's a different game, really. It's
It looks like Prince of Persia, and I've seen people being like, "Just fucking make Prince of Persia,"
yeah.
and I'm like, "Yeah, just make Prince of Persia."
So I know a little bit on that,
I know bugger all about
um
any of it. I've seen
what I
one
will,
clip.
what I think might excite you with it, Luke, potentially, is from everything that we do know and from things they've said and from other things that I can kind of comment on. Um, it sounds like it's going back to old school Assassin's Creed. And it's also a
I think it's
30,
too late.
it's also a I think they've said it's a 30-hour game. So it's
Mhm.
like literally the entire game is 30 hours.
It it has to
Uh,
stand above what everyone else is doing because there are so many kinds of those games
yeah.
now.
Well, it's like someone said, right? Someone was talking about, the thing is, after Ghost of Tsushima, which even though some people had issues with, was still held in high regard.
Mhm.
After Ghost of Tsushima, if you're going back to that style, you have to do it better than you've ever done it
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. Or you have to
And
do it differently. You have to have a different take on it, or do
yeah,
something more
yeah.
interesting.
So, but you know, as an old school Assassin's Creed fan, that is a
Yeah,
game that excites me personally
I
because it's
used
like
to be. I used
they're
to.
doing something different.
I've got like a Ezio statue somewhere back there. Like I
Nice.
used to love Assassin's Creed. I would religiously buy them every year, play them every year until
Until it got to the point.
four,
Black Flag. Black Flag was
four,
4.
three, three with Connor.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
didn't like that one. I didn't like it.
A
I
lot of
didn't like
people
it.
did. A
But
lot
Black
of
Flag
people
was
didn't
sick.
like that one.
That was the
Yeah.
first time I was like, this sucks. But like Black Flag was sick. But
Mhm.
then Black Flag was sick until they did the Assassin's Creed stuff. And then I was like,
Which is
make a pirate
interesting
game.
because then you
Just make a
realized,
pirate
okay,
game.
maybe yeah.
And then they're like, yeah, Skull and Bones. It's like, not like that. It's
Yeah.
not the pirate game I meant.
In-
But
interesting. But yeah, no, you
yeah,
were
no,
saying so you disconnected, obviously, so you haven't
big time.
heard about certain things.
Yeah, no, and that all started when the podcast took a break for a bit. So it's like Sean was busy doing stuff, and then
Yeah,
were
we
like,
literally only missed a few weeks, but it was just that me
I
and
think it was
Sean
2
were
weeks.
me and Sean were both busy for about 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and you had 2 weeks of not,
Yeah.
because we got to the point where we had to engage with things that we maybe wouldn't have, right? We kind of had to engage on a level that we weren't previously because we had to keep up with news and we had to, and I mean,
Yeah.
it's different for me because obviously my job being what it is, that's always kind of important for me to do anyway. So does that make sense? So for me, it's different.
No, absolutely. You have to
But
do it. Yeah.
but for someone like you, where you didn't have to do it and you did it out of enjoyment for a while, but then the podcast was kind of forcing you to do it. And
what
not in a like, you know, I don't want to sound like a dictator, but
get on Twitter. Look at this thing. No. Like it was just like, you know, and it wasn't even the podcast really. It was like I'm doing reviews and that sort of stuff. Like I'm doing my own stuff, which is in that realm as well. Like it's the nature of what we were trying to do and what we were trying to build. Like we have to keep up with what's going on.
Yeah.
Because like that's what we were trying to build.
So when you took that step back, what happened that made you kind of rediscover your love of games?
I just played games.
Okay.
I didn't do it to write anything. I didn't, you know, I wasn't.
You just played it for the enjoyment, right?
I literally
I
just played games. And I'm trying to think what game it was, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But I just played a game. I literally just went back to basics with it. I was just like, I'm just playing a game. I'm not thinking about doing a review for it. I'm not thinking about whatever. You know what? It might have even been Power Wash Sim.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because I adored that game. I was genuinely gutted when the credits started rolling. I was like, you mean there isn't more?
Yeah, and then I think the interesting thing that you obviously very quickly figured out was there's a way to balance kind of that interest in games and being, I think you said it to me in kind of one of our chats previously, where you were like, one thing that you realized is that one thing that you kind of rediscovered about games is you can enjoy games that nobody else likes. Like you can enjoy games that everyone else in the circle says is bad.
Yeah, 100%. I've done this for years with like other things. Like genuinely, 100%, hand on heart. No would lie. If God exists, I'll swear to him as well. Don't, or her, or it. I love the Eiffel 60 whatever the fuck song Blue.
Yeah.
Dabba dee dabba die. Genuinely love that song. It's a fucking dreadful song. It's horrendous. It's a terrible song. Fucking love it. But there is also an interesting story behind it. I didn't know it. One of my friends is really into music and he makes music semi-successfully. And he's like, there's this cool documentary behind it because it was kind of like, you know how Scott Cawthon had tried making games for a bunch and then Five Nights at Freddy's was his final, like, fuck it, we're gonna do this. The remix that everyone knows of Blue was like their 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever attempt at it, and it was finally the one that blew up. There's a really interesting story behind it. But like,
I actually really like that song as
well.
Like,
it's like the MCU. It's like people are like, oh, it should have ended with Endgame. It's like, yeah, but it didn't. And I'm watching She-Hulk, and I popped like a motherfucker when Frog Dude came out.
Yeah,
rip it and rip it, motherfucker. I love that thing.
And the thing is, you find your own enjoyment, right? Like
you do.
You find your level of, you know, And I think, it's great to see that you've kind of found that enjoyment again, and especially with kind of being able to continue making content as well. But I think what it
Yeah,
is you're now making content with your enjoyment in mind, and because
yeah,
you're
absolutely.
enjoying it,
Other people are
other
enjoying it as
people
well.
enjoy it.
Because
And
like
go on.
it coincided with, like, I'd always been watching Game Grumps and Bugplant and stuff like that, but like it coincided where I'd taken a step back from, I wasn't reading articles anymore. I haven't listened to a gaming podcast in forever. Um, and like
I
I just
think you
really started listening to
you said it for a
them.
while that like when you took a step back, most of the news that you get from the industry really now is like when someone in our group will share it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like there are
yeah, yeah,
lots
yeah.
of things where you're like, oh, I didn't know this was a thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I still see like a bunch on Twitter, but I don't take any note of it. I'm just like, oh yeah, cool,
It
whatever,
just
scroll
sort of
past.
passes you by,
Um,
right? Until you have, but then there's that other level of
mm,
what I think maybe, I don't know if you've realized this, but I certainly have recently, of like it's different having a conversation with your friends, which is just like,
mhm.
having a conversation about things and keeping up with things in a friendship group is different than covering things on a podcast
Oh
and
yeah,
keeping up with it for a job or whatever it might be, right? Is
yeah,
a different level of stuff because when you're only talking about it in a friendship group, you people will talk about the things that you want to talk about. So it's
yeah.
like sometimes I'll bring
You
something up
choose
and
what you engage with.
and you know what I do, like in our WhatsApp group, sometimes I'll just ask a random question and then that
Yeah,
creates
yeah.
a massive tangent in our group, but it's
Mm.
always an interesting conversation
Mm.
because you always get something from someone that you maybe
Yeah, yeah,
didn't
yeah,
know before.
yeah.
But that's different than kind of having to keep up with everything, right? And
Yeah,
being
yeah,
like, oh,
yeah.
here's
And
this
like,
other negative piece of news, and here's this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And like, obviously, I don't know where it's all at now, but this was like in a time where all the sexual harassment stuff was going on. There
Of
was a lot of
course.
crunch stuff. There was just so much shit going on in the
Mm-hmm.
industry,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it was just like, I still really loved games, but I also just kind of started to really dislike the industry itself.
Because you don't like the stuff that maybe was going on behind the curtain, right? In
Yeah,
and it doesn't mean it was going on everywhere,
no,
but
no, of course not.
the problem is when bad things like that happen, it's almost like
It just gets attached. Yeah,
it gets attached to the entire thing,
yeah.
and then it creates this kind of, I don't even know what the right word is for it, but almost like a hate where it's like I don't like what's going on in this industry and things need to change, which they very
It
clearly
it
did.
yeah,
Um,
it's kind of scaremongering in a way, because they're like, oh, video games is bad. It's like, no, just that one is. Like,
mhm.
it's just them being shitty, or that one person's being shitty, and like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
media would
and
twist it and
I
contort
think
it and
we've seen it
whatnot.
in other ways as well. It's
Yeah,
like things. It is almost like stereotypes, right? Like that isn't the right word, but it's
yeah,
almost like stereotypes where a certain opinion of a certain thing or a certain thing that's going on gets attached to everybody else.
yeah. It's just
And then it's
labeling
like,
things.
oh,
Yeah,
everything's negative. And
yeah,
then it's like, but then it makes the actual games themselves negative when
yeah,
they shouldn't be, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And this is something that I've spoken about even with Activision games. Like we've had this discussion of like, okay, Activision have done some very horrible things, and horrible things have been happening in that company to people that haven't
I
deserved it.
think I think that's the key way of talking about it, though. Is like, Activision haven't done horrible things. The people within Activision, or
Yeah,
a sect of people within,
yeah,
there is still, and this is where
and that was
the
kind of
trouble with like
where.
boycotting
Mm,
people, or
well,
like
that's
studios
kind of
is.
where
It's
I was
like,
going to go with it, is because the
mm,
conversation we've had is like, just because realistically and it's a lot of people. I'm not saying that these things shouldn't be punished. They absolutely should. But what I'm saying is, should we punish innocent people who work on these games and pour their life into these games by
yeah,
not supporting the games just because of the actions of mostly a minority within a company?
yeah. Obviously, it's the powerful minority, and thus, they should be ousted for what they're doing.
Yeah.
But like, you've got, it's the same as like it's slightly different, but like the Hogwarts game, a lot of
Mhm.
people would be like, I ain't touching it. I'm like, I
Because of
completely
the JK
understand.
stuff,
J.K.
right?
Rowling is
Mhm.
a bit of a twat. I've always thought she was a stuffy twat anyway, but now I've lost track. I don't know what the fuck she's doing now.
I have no idea.
But
I
like,
have
I
no
love
idea.
that world. And like
Yeah.
a lot of the devs that have
And
worked on
also the
it
people
would
who make,
also have
yeah, they
loved that
love it,
world.
right?
And they've dedicated so much of their lives to putting hard work into making this world come to life. And it looks like a game that always it's the Harry Potter game I've always wanted it to be.
Yeah.
From what
Yeah.
we can see. I
And
don't know. I
also,
don't have it in hand.
if people have done a good job and they've made something cool, it's about what that line of separation is, right? Like we always
Yeah.
say, where do you separate the creation from the creator and the
Yeah.
artist
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
human being, right? And I just, maybe it is because I'm a dev, but there's always that part of me where it's like, I want to support developers. So, for example, Modern Warfare 2, I will be picking up that game. There's a few reasons. One is I liked the 2019 Modern Warfare game, and I think the campaign was great, and I want to see the continuation of that. But two is these people spend their, like, they've put their lives into this game, and it's like, if I want to play it, and I would play it if it wasn't for this situation, then do I not kind of owe it to them to still play it? Do you know what I mean? Do I not, in a weird way, why should I not support them just because some people at the top and people in high up positions are fucking awful people? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like if it's something you're interested in, why shouldn't you support the people who made it, regardless of what the people that never touched it are doing?
Yeah.
Because like I
Yeah.
can guarantee you, Bobby Kotick has had fuck all to do with Call of Duty for a
Yeah. The
good long
actual
while. Like,
product itself. Yes, he makes money
yeah,
off of it, and yes, all
yeah.
this kind of stuff. But the actual product is itself, he hasn't made, right? He hasn't made
No. He might
it.
have steered it in the direction and whatnot, but yeah, he hasn't done it. But
Yeah. So
yeah,
I
and
know,
like
I get that. I get all
all of
that
that
stuff.
kind of all of that kind of stuff was all building at one time,
Mhm.
essentially. And then like my focus kind of, like I said, the podcast took some time off.
Mhm.
And granted, it was only a short time off, but because we were such in the rhythm of doing it every weekend,
Yeah.
it felt like
Once you don't
ages.
have to do it, it felt,
Yeah, it
yeah.
felt like ages. Because I think I might have had some time off at the same time. It was like, I'm sick.
Mhm.
I've got time off
Yeah, I think
and
what
time off for
happened,
podcast sort of thing.
was you missed a week, then me and Sean
Rare,
missed
yeah.
2 weeks. Then it was like during that time we were missing 2 weeks, you had time
Sure.
off your day job. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
had time to explore other things.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, you probably just played some games and were like,
Yeah,
oh,
I literally played games and I got fully back engrossed in like Game Grumps and I was watching it religiously.
Mhm.
And like it started to kind of dawn on me that like I don't remember exactly time period, but like I said, Horizon Forbidden
Forbidden
West,
West. Yeah.
stupid names. Um I was playing it and I was like, I'm gonna make this review. And then at some point it just dawned on me. I was like, I've put 80 hours into this game, which could have so easily just been 80 hours of me fucking about and just fun content
Yeah.
instead of me taking this game far too seriously. And I could have just had way more fun with it. So that's what I started to do. I started with Elden Ring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
No, I
have
get
way
that.
more fun.
I get
And I
that.
continue to have way more fun. And like the channel has grown
There's a
because
difference, and that's one thing we didn't talk about earlier, and I want to talk about in a second my kind of
Mm.
falling out of love with games. But as a little quick thing, um, one thing that kind of we didn't mention was when you're playing a game as a reviewer, and when you're playing a game as someone who's going to cover that game in some way, whether it's informally, whether it's in an informal sense of a podcast discussion that we do, or whether it's a proper review like the videos that you used to do, you play the game in a different way
Yeah,
because
and it's hard to turn off. Even when
yeah,
you're not, you still think about it in that way. Even when you're
yeah,
not planning on reviewing something, you're still
because you
like the
train
amount of
yourself to
games.
think that way about games, right?
Yeah. The amount of times I was like, sick, I'm just gonna play
Mhm.
this game for me, and then it ended up being a video
Yeah,
because I
and
was
that
thinking about it in that way.
and that kind of feeds into what happened with me, and I've spoken a bit to you about it before, but I've never really spoken about it in
Mm.
a public sense. But as you can imagine, being a game developer massively changes the way you look at video games.
Mm-hmm.
and some of that is positive and I'm talking purely from the gamer side of it. Some of that is actually very positive and some of it is negative. So, and it leads into why I fell out of love with games. So the positive aspect is, since I've been a developer, and Luke even knows this, I've played a massively more varied selection of
Yeah.
games. I've played
Yeah.
games that I would not have played before.
Mm.
And a massive part of that is you want to learn from all places, right? You want, like, as a developer, you want to play a game, you want to learn from all places and be like, oh, what did they do really well?
Yeah.
And but you see it in a way that your average gamer doesn't. Like, I'm not trying to belittle
Yeah.
anybody, but you do see it in a way that your
Well,
average
yeah, 'cause
gamer doesn't.
you're looking a bit deeper
Mm-hmm.
than most. Like, a lot of people are just playing these games to have fun.
Yeah, and one of the things that I talked about with you is that made me appreciate things in games that I wouldn't have appreciated previously. So
Yeah.
it therefore actually made me like games that I wouldn't have liked before. But on the flip side of that, it also made things that weren't even annoying to me before more noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
And like, oh, I know how to fix this, so why is it a problem? Like, do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
it changes your brain in terms of the way you think about games. And I think that what ended up happening was almost like you with the reviews. I ended up taking every game so seriously, where it was like, it was almost like I can see between the lines of this video game. I know exactly where you're going to place the item that I need because I know how I would do it. And most of the time, I was correct on that assumption, right?
Yeah.
Because there are certain design principles that exist
Yeah.
that I just won't go into here, but
Yeah.
there are things that exist of this is the way you design it, and
You
this
play a
is the
couple of
way that
horror
it
games, you know where
works.
that next jump scare is coming from.
Yeah, and it's
Like,
so but when you're trained on a deep level to think
yeah,
that way, like
yeah,
that's something you've picked up just from playing a few horror games, and you know when things are coming by
yeah,
doing
man,
that.
yeah.
But imagine having an even deeper level of
Just
that
on
with
a
every
much broader
single
scale. Yeah,
genre of game. Like,
yeah.
it's weird because it almost takes the surprise away to a
Mm-hmm.
certain extent, and it makes it to the point where the only surprising thing is the storytelling aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only thing that can kind of surprise you about a game. That's not me belittling anything, because it actually, like I said, on the other side, it made me enjoy some of those things more. For example, um Hitman 3, I think, is some of
Oh,
the best level design ever in existence.
I think all three of those games they're fantastic,
Yeah.
incredible games.
But it's one of those things where the level design of that game alone made me love the game,
I
right?
played all three back to back to back. I struggle to do that with games. I bought the collection. I played one, two, three. I think that
Wow.
actually might have been the game that I played while we were on the break, and that was one of the ones where I just sat back and I
Okay.
fucking love this game
Wow.
because she'd been trying to get me to play them for ages. I'm like, I played
Yeah.
the first one. I haven't played the second one.
Yeah, and I
I'll
was
play
like,
them.
you need to play them because they've improved.
Yeah. I played all three, and I was just like, "Fuck, this is
But it
so
was,
good."
but that's what I mean. It was just one of those things where it was like, I always liked Hitman, as you know, Luke.
Yeah, same. Yeah, same.
But then Hitman 3 was like, to me, Hitman 3 in many ways was my game of the year that year. Like, I think
It
it
was kind of,
was.
to me, it was the same sort of jump that was it Blood Money? So
Yeah, I
Blood
think
Money was the
so.
last
Blood
really good
Money
one,
back in the
where
day.
Blood Money kind of stood up above. It's kind of the same sort of jump that took.
Yeah.
Like,
And it was just, and like I said, but for me, on the kind of thinking as my game designer aspect on it, it was like, oh, I really love this game.
Didn't you do a video about that as well?
I
Didn't you?
did, yeah.
Yeah.
On the original Game for All channel, you can find a little kind of playthrough video I did of the first level, talking about some of the design aspects and why the developers might have made some of the decisions they did from my perspective, and things they were trying to convey to the player by doing certain things. Which is, hopefully that people find that interesting. But but that's what I mean. I did that one video about one level. That's how I think about every single level of every game that I ever play
Mm.
every single moment I'm playing a video game, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it makes you enjoy games less from a pure enjoyment standpoint
Mm.
because you're not playing them to enjoy them. You're playing them to
Research. The
see what they
research.
do well.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean you don't enjoy them because of those aspects. You just
Mm.
enjoy it for a very different reason. And then what happened was it was like I can't remember what game I was playing, but I was playing one game. Um it might have been Halo Infinite, actually.
Oh yeah.
Um where I was playing the campaign. And I was like, me as a gamer, I should enjoy this because I've always liked Halo and they've done some really cool things here. And it's really, really interesting, right? They've
Mhm.
added a story that I actually care about. They've taken it to an open world, all these kind of things that I actually really did like. But then the designer in me couldn't get past the fact of like, oh, I'd play it and it'd be like, oh, this is a problem. Oh, that's a problem.
Mm.
And it would make me
You
not
can kind
enjoy the
of
game.
spotlight problems before they like impact you straight,
Yeah.
like firsthand
Yeah.
sort of thing.
And
Yeah,
it
yeah,
and it and it made me not enjoy the game, even though the gamer inside me knew I should enjoy it
yeah.
from a purely gamer perspective.
Hmm.
Um and that was where I sort of made the decision of like, okay, I need something. I need to find something that helps me to kind of reset my way of looking at
Palette cleanser.
games
Yeah,
for when I want to play a game just for me, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
weirdly, that thing ended up being reviews. And I'll explain why. It's because when I review a game, I could review a game as a developer. I
Mm.
could do that. But that's not what my job is, right? That's not for the site for outerhaven.net. My job isn't to do a developer review, reviewing other developers' games. My job is to do a review as a gamer,
Mm.
right? So it makes me turn the developer brain off, which is weird. People think, how can you do that? But once you're aware that it's there, you can. Like, once you're aware that it's there, you figure out a way of, okay, this is not why I'm playing this game.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then you just, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And reviews helped me to figure out that process of
Mm.
how do I turn the developer brain off when I'm actually playing a game, because I had to think about it from the gamer perspective because that's who I was reviewing it for. So I had to sit there and instead of thinking about it from a developer perspective of, oh, this can be fixed and that and that and that, it was like, I have to think, yeah, that can be fixed, but as a gamer, it's annoying to me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's, and that's not to say that, I don't want people to think that that means what I'm saying or what I think of a game is fake. It just comes from two different parts of my brain.
It's just, yeah, it's perspective.
Yeah, so
You're just looking at it one way compared to a different way.
yeah. Um but yeah, weirdly, so yeah, reviews for me were that thing where it was like, okay, I'm starting to enjoy games now.
Mm.
And that was because, weirdly, the first review I ever did was Crossfire X. You can go and you can go and read that review.
I forgot
Um
about that game.
and it is what it is. But it was one of those things where there was even a level of enjoyment with that game because I wasn't playing it as Jordan, the developer who's looking to learn something, right? I
Mm.
was playing it as, oh, how good is this game? But again, not in the developer way of like, oh, what does it do well? What doesn't it do well?
Yeah.
And that is the level of critical thinking that I like, where I think it's not too far. Because when you're only thinking about what it does well and what it doesn't do well, you're still able to enjoy it outside of that, right? Because
Hmm.
you're able to say, okay, most people probably won't like this aspect, but I actually didn't find it too frustrating, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and things. It's kind of like how we talk about with bugs in video games a lot
I
of the
was literally
time,
about to say that. Yeah.
about how there's a different level for everyone of
Yeah.
what their tolerance is with the
Yeah,
level of
yeah.
bugs.
I
I
used to be
played,
like
go on.
really strict and being like, oh, bug, write that down. Now I'm like, oh, bug, that's fucking funny. That's hilarious. Like, 'cause that's why I
But
want to
that's
get
the
to
gamer
Cyberpunk.
thing,
So
right? That's the
yeah,
that's the weird gamer thing of like, and I think that people, and you know, again, I really am not trying to put anybody down here. It's just,
that's
you
just
know,
opinion.
I'm just saying, I think that one thing people maybe don't realize, as if they're not inclined to think in that critical way about games, which is not a bad thing at all. I'm not saying it's
Nope.
a bad thing, but if they're not inclined to think in that critical way about video games, I don't think they understand how it affects your opinion on a game. But I also think they then find it weird when you're able to turn that off, because
Yeah.
you've turned it off in the same way that I have, but it's kind of different parts of our brain, right? I've turned off the work part of my brain. That's what
Mhm.
goes off. Like when I play a game at night, or when we play grounded on co-op at some point, probably it's like I'm not sat there as Jordan the developer playing the game. I'm
Yeah.
sat there as, oh, this is my gamer time now. I get to
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
gamer again.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and it's funny because I think of things like Bethesda games, right? And I think to myself, why, like, as I've learned more about games and as I've started to make games and all this kind of stuff, you start to think to yourself, oh, why did people actually like Bethesda games back in the day in some way? Because they had a lot of bugs, right? So
Their charm. Yeah.
why was that not more grating for people?
Mm.
But then when you kind of separate that critical way of thinking, is what you realize is the majority of gamers actually find bugs funny as long as they're not breaking the game,
Yeah.
as long as they're not, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you're
Yeah.
just trying to be a gamer, it can be quite
Yeah.
hilarious when
I mean,
something goes wrong.
I think it was Game Ranks used to like every time there was it might have been every week or every month or something, but they had a video where you just sent in bugs and they would just be like, yeah, that one's funny as shit. Look at his head. Why is it coming out of his ass? That's weird. Like it kind of looks
Yeah,
some like Rick and Morty
yeah.
monster sort of thing.
Because like
Like
I
it's funny.
remember, so a couple of years ago, and this is when I was kind of newer to the industry, but a couple of years ago, when I was first in that kind of mindset of thinking, I was playing Mafia 3
Oh, I
and
like Mafia 3, yeah.
loved the game. But one
Mm.
time, this car literally got stuck diagonally in the floor. Like half the
Yeah.
car was in the floor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And obviously, from my developer mindset, it was like, oh, that's really fucking odd. You know what I mean? It was like, oh,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
problem there.
yeah.
But then I actually saved that clip and I went back and watched it a few weeks ago. And it was like, no, this is hilarious. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
this
Yeah.
car just
I
randomly
mean
gets
that
stuck in the middle of
like
the ring.
that's the kind of fun divergent thing I have with wanting to play Cyberpunk is part of me really wants to experience it the way it was meant to be experienced, and then the other part of me hopes it's still buggy as shit because it'll be funny.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
looking out for that to
Absolutely.
be like critical about it anymore. I'm looking out
Mhm.
for it to make a joke
And
about
that's
it
the
and like
thing. I
react to it
I
and whatnot.
know, and that's what I've figured out as well from my perspective is, I've always been quite serious about games anyway. That's
Mhm.
just who I am, right? Like I always used to joke to you that gaming is more than a hobby to me,
Yeah,
which it basically is, right? Like it's
yeah,
my job. Um um but what I like now is I've got to the point where I can decide, okay, why am I playing this game? Am I playing it just to have fun?
mm,
Am I playing it to learn something from it and do a bit of research and help me in my job? Or am I playing it to review it? And those three things, in some way, are slightly separate in terms of
yeah,
their perspective. There's crossover
yeah,
of
yeah,
all
yeah,
three of them,
yeah.
but they are slightly separate. And I think that, you know, some people just don't understand the ability to do that because they can't compartmentalize.
I'll be perfectly honest. I still struggle with that.
Yeah.
The
But the
amount of
weird
times
thing
I'm
is,
just like, oh, I'm not gonna make a video on it, and then I start playing. I'm like, I'm having too much fun.
and
I want to make a video, but it's like, it's in the opposite way. It's like, I'm
yeah.
having a lot of
But
fun with
that's
this. I
where I
want to make
think
a
that
fun
you're
video.
able to strike a balance that unfortunately in some way that I'll never be able to with playing games anymore,
Mm.
where because of the type of content you're creating, you're able to play games in a way that enables you to create more content.
Yeah. Like literally, as of recording this, like the last video I put out
Yeah.
was the Death Trips one, and I wasn't gonna make a video about that first, but then like like because a friend recommended it to me because it's an older one. There's no way I would have found it, as I was now.
For sure. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I like a friend recommended it to me. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna check it out, and I'm like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna make a video about this.
Yeah, yeah, for
And then
sure.
like
And
it's doing really well for the
but
channel so
that's the
far.
weird thing is I do like I said earlier, I think that you still have that critical part of your brain in the sense of if I said to you one day, okay, Luke, I need you to come and help me cover this game, like I
Mhm.
have no, do you know what I mean? If it was a thing where I set out to you where it's
Yeah. I can
like,
switch it back on. Yeah.
it never goes away.
No.
But that's the thing. That's why for me, I have to do that compartmentalizing thing.
Mhm.
And I said to you years ago, and I think Sean was the one. Sean always found it quite funny because he was like, "How do you do that?" But I always used to joke about the cap, right? But that was my
Mhm.
way of being like, but that's how I kind of switch what I'm.
It like I've always understood it because it's just a different. I've always loved writing. I like
Yeah,
coming at things from different angles, and like
mm.
I've fallen more and more in love with the idea of creative writing.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like so one of the things I love and I really want more games and movies and whatnot to explore are conspiracy theories. I think they are fucking ripe for sick world building and whatnot. I think there's a lot you can fuck about with in there, and like a lot of it is just a news article, but you're coming at it from a different angle,
yeah,
or
yeah,
like
yeah.
a lot of funny stuff
And
is just a
I
news thing
think
that
the
you're coming at from a
problem that
different
I find, which somewhat feeds into this podcast in a weird way,
angle.
is I think that it makes people think I'm not being genuine. But what they don't realize is I have two different opinions in my brain, and they're both right.
Yeah,
Like,
you're allowed to have more
do you
what
know what I
like
mean? It's
you
like
can
one
have
of
more
the
than one thought of a game. Like
yeah.
I could tell you I can't think of one off the top of my head. Like
Well,
X game is shit, but I
well, it's,
fucking love playing
it's
it.
like I've said to you, and I won't mention any of the specific games here, but there
Mm,
are some big games where I've said to you, like as a gamer, I really like this game, but
mm.
as a designer, I have massive problems with it.
Yeah.
And but for me, there are always going to be games like that. It's the same way that there are going to be games that I don't like playing myself,
Yeah.
but as a designer, I appreciate.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to something I'm going to be playing very soon, which is Persona 5, sorry, Royale,
Oh,
which obviously is coming on Game Pass very soon, and I've never played it, and I'm really looking forward to playing it.
those
But
games.
that's going to be an interesting one to balance because I want to play. It's the first time ever, really, since certainly within the last couple of years, where I'm playing a game because I want to play it, but I
Yeah.
also want to learn something from it at the same time. So being
Yeah.
able to kind of balance those two mindsets is weird because, like as because I always talk to you about what I'm doing and stuff like that.
Mm, yeah.
But there are games that I play purely because it's like, no, I want to play this to see what it's all about. Like I want to play this to learn about it. You know,
Yeah.
there are games that I've literally bought just out of my developer intrigue.
Bro, like I have a similar thing. The amount of times I'll be watching a Markiplier video and I will cut it after a couple of minutes because I'm like, no, I want to
Yeah,
do this. I
yeah,
want
you
to do
want
it
to see it
myself. I want to
yourself,
play it.
right?
And then
Yeah.
it's really annoying because there was one time where like I played a game and I'm like, yeah, Markiplier has covered this to be sick. I'll get to
Mm.
it first. And then the next video he put out, he fucking covers it. And I'm like, no, it's
Yeah,
not my thing. Fun.
yeah.
But
So I
like,
want,
it's just looking at it in different perspectives. And
yeah,
like you could do that. It's not hard.
so
It's
I
just
want,
you have to train yourself a little bit.
I want to end on a piece of advice for people because I've heard from a lot of people lately about falling out of love with games and
Mhm.
and all this kind of stuff. And I think that some of that is social media to blame. If I'm completely honest, I do think
A lot
social
of things,
media
sorry. Yeah.
creates a problem there. um, but my piece of advice for people, if you've fallen out of love with games, if it is because if you're a reviewer, maybe that's out there, if you're a content creator, maybe just separate from the content for a little while and go
Mm.
back to playing games, even just for a week, where you just play games for yourself and see what that brings to your mind. See whether it is, is it the content or is it the coverage aspect that's taking your enjoyment away? Um, and then the other thing is just kind of like don't worry about why you're playing games because you can play a game just to play it and then switch on the other parts of your brain later if you need to. Like you can, it's like Luke said, there are some games where he starts off just playing it to play it, and then he's like, okay, no, actually, I'm going to make a video. And that is it's a smaller mindset change than I'm now
Yeah.
going to review the game, but it's still a mindset change because it's still, I would imagine, Luke, when you decide, okay, I'm going to make a video about it, that somewhat affects maybe the way that you play the game or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're like, I don't tend to do it with horror games because kind of numbs the virus in that case. Like there's no point that
Mm,
it's not going to get you if you know it's coming. But like you can just change the way you react to some things, or
mm,
you can start from a certain point, or
for sure, for
whatever.
sure.
Like there's those are ways of going about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, and what I would say is, just I don't know how old you are if you're falling out of love with games, but try and be in touch with the person inside you that fell in love with games. Try and understand why you loved games in the first place, because there are still games out there that do that thing. They might just be harder to find now. And that's something that me and Luke have spoken about many, 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 many
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
times. Of like, there's a lot of games out there that people don't even know exist but actually, and some of them aren't even indie games. Some of them are
Check out.
much bigger
Yeah,
games,
yeah, yeah.
and people just aren't. We spoke about Plague Tale Innocence earlier on. I guarantee you, there are still people in the world who don't know that game exists.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and yet it's a game that they might love. And there are so many games like that. Things like Mortal Shell, which is a kind of Souls-like style game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but has his own interesting spin. Like
I
there
mean,
are loads and
yeah, yeah.
loads of games.
I mean, the most played game in the world. I couldn't tell you what the name of the game was.
Yeah, I know, right?
Like the game with the most players
Mhm.
is unknown to most people.
Yeah,
I've
which is
watched a
crazy.
bunch of videos about it, and I still can't remember what it's called.
Which is crazy, right?
But I could point it out if I see it.
So
But
yeah, I would, maybe well, everyone does digital these days, but I was going to say maybe go to your game shop and just pick up a random game off the shelf. Like a random game that, I used to do this back in the day. I don't know about you, Luke, but
oh, big time.
I'd go to like the pre-owned section and it'll be like, oh, what in here haven't I
Pre-owned
heard of?
section. I'd just go to CEX, bro. It's all pre-owned. I wasn't fancy enough to own a new games. I used to play some weird shit. Do you know what? And I think, man, it's kind of a good and a bad thing that they're gone. But like, I played and found out about so many games through demo discs.
Oh yeah,
I've
yeah,
started
yeah.
collecting them again. I've got like
Do you know
five or
what I
six
did
back there. I
enjoy
love demo
recently,
discs.
actually? I really enjoyed the Wo Long demo, and
Oh yeah,
I
sure.
hope that the reception to that demo might see a little bit of return for demos in games, because there are certain games that I think are really helped by having a demo. And we've spoken about it before, just to do a
Definitely
little
should come
bit
back.
more of serious coverage after we've talked about not doing it. But we've spoken about it before, how sometimes we'd be watching a show or whatever, could be a PlayStation State of Play, and we see a game and it just doesn't click with us because what we're seeing doesn't resonate with our brain.
Mm.
But then when you can play it, sometimes it feels very different, right? I think an example of that recently for PlayStation themselves in many ways is Stray. There are people that weren't interested in Stray at all, and they loved the game when they played it. And then there were other people who were completely sold on it because it was a cat. You know?
And then there's Jordan, who hates cats because he is an unloving creature.
I'll play the game now. I will play the game.
You
Haven't
should.
got to it yet.
I love my Ronald. I really hope, in a way, there's more, but I also hope there isn't. You know, I'm
So
happy with
yes,
where it was.
let us know. Have you fallen out of love with games? And if you have previously, and then you've come to love gaming again, what was the reason? What was the thing that got you back in? Was it a specific game? Was it, you know, a new console generation, which I know sometimes reinvigorates people's love of gaming? What was it? What was the thing that got you back in? I'd love to know, because I think we all go up and down with gaming. I've had times before, even before I was a developer, where it was like, oh, I can't be bothered. Like, I just, it's not that I didn't enjoy playing games. I just couldn't be bothered to play games.
The only time I had that genuinely was because we couldn't afford a new console after my PS2 broke.
Oh, wow.
I went a year without video games.
Oh, man.
And then we got an Xbox 360 and I played the shit out of Gears of War.
Nice.
Still has a special place.
So yeah, let us know in the comments. Luke, thank you for returning to the show. Hopefully we will see you again in the future.
I'm sure we will.
Maybe before the end of the year. Who knows? We might bring you on again. I've got a few little episodes planned. And,
dude, we will talk about High on Life. I will come back for High on Life.
Oh, absolutely. There you go then.
We'll chat shit about High on Life.
We will put that one in the calendar. Some point Luke will come on the show to talk about High on Life.
December?
Comes out on December the 13th.
Oh, I can't wait for that.
So maybe a special Christmas present to you all will be Luke back on the show again.
Yeah. I'll put on a Santa hat. I'll make sure to subscribe to all jingles and whatnot.
We will do some sort of game of the year this year as a podcast. And what I might do, Luke, if you want to, is I know you may not have played enough games from this year to actually have an official list, but what might be quite interesting for you, if you haven't, is a list of games that you discovered this year, because I think that could be interesting.
I have played quite a lot of games from this year.
Nice. Well,
so
maybe
it's not in the traditional like, I played Elden Ring and
of course, yeah.
But that might even name another
one. Who knows? That might be a fun little list that we'll add to our G4A game of the year this year, if we can arrange it and Luke can be on.
Oh yeah, my current game of the year definitely wouldn't win because nobody else has played it probably.
Well, I mean, my current game of the year, spoiler, is Shredder's Revenge.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, that's a sick game. I love that game. That was a dope one.
And who knows, if I play more of Grounded, that might also be up there, because I am going to allow that one because it's had its full release.
Sure.
So I am.
I mean, it's your rules issue. Like, I'm not hosting a game of the year thing, so it's
my rules.
Like it's all you.
Yeah.
I may well tag along, but I am not hosting. I'm not making up rules. I'm just there for fun times and shits and giggles.
Nice. Not
in that order necessarily.
Nice. Well, like I said, thank you for joining us, Luke. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Get in the YouTube comments and have a conversation with us, because we are very nice people. Luke does some great short videos, so go and check those out, and he also has some great playthroughs. I don't know what you're playing next, Luke. What's up next?
I am about to do a game called Security Booth.
Nice.
There's a bunch. I've got like this weird SpongeBob thing that I've downloaded that looks dope. Like, I don't know. It just depends what I download from Itch.io next.
This podcast is probably out on Wednesday, the 12th of October, which is my birthday. So I am now older. And yeah, I will see you guys next week. I think Jeff is back on next week. Not sure what the topic is yet, but we will have.
Jeff. It's a good boy.
He is. He's talk about reviewing games. God, that guy doesn't stop.
It's hard to watch him when his head dislocates and starts singing and whatnot.
So yeah, Jeff's back on. We may be talking about the best fighting games, possibly, because there's a few coming up that are interesting. So we thought it might be a nice look back at
Dead or Alive,
some of the best fighting games.
Dead or
And
alive.
yeah, like I said, Luke's been back. Luke's come back. He said hello. Now he's gonna go again, but
Hello.
he'll be back in
I say
December. And
at the very yeah, definitely do that.
and possibly before that, with Luke, as we said before, it very much depends on the topic. But we felt like this was
Yes.
an important, quite serious discussion to have because there may have been some other people that were feeling a similar way about gaming recently.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gone through a hell of a time recently. So,
But
you know.
hopefully 2023 is a good year. There's so many good games coming.
And if not, jump on Itch.io. Jump on Itch.io. There's so many fun games on there, even if you just go for the horror section. It's a
For
perfect
sure.
time of year to do it.
We will see you next time. Goodbye.
Ta-da!